Merwin Short, born 1913. My grandfather was on the river all of his life. My father was on the river all his life. And I've been around it all my life. I think I've got 67 years on the river. My grandfather was killed on the river. Grain barge capsized and suffocated in jet. He was on a telegraph, Bailey Gatzert, Twin Cities. That's about all I know. That's all I remember.
So you're telling me that he skippered some of those boats?
Most of them, yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And what was his full name?
Marshall Sherman Short. Karl Robert Short. Well, they pioneered this river. There was no navigation aids. They used a pike pole to find their way up and down the river. Stumps and trees for navigation aids. And they actually pioneered the whole river system. My father had a skipper's license at 21 years of age. Worked the old Sternwheelers up and down the river. Passengers and freight, log boats. Their life was on the river. Well, these boats run from Portland to Salem, Portland to Tri-City up to Columbia, Astoria, Deep River, Youngs River. Basically Columbia River and tributaries. Willamette, Multnomah Channel.
And would they pick up passengers on docks on the river?
Passengers wherever they were and took them and brought them back. When I started on the river, passengers could go to Astoria for $1. Round trip was $1.50 from Portland to Astoria. We used to handle 200, 250 passengers a trip.
Where along the way did you pick up passengers?
Oh, about 25 different stations. Reeder's Landing down on Sophie's Island, St. Helens, Caples, Rainier, Longview, Stella, Cathlamet. The canneries, fish canneries were all scattered along the river, and we picked them up at Pillow Rock, Brookfield, McGowan, and of course Astoria, Tongue Point. It was a service just like you would go on a bus service today, but it was a service on the river. To go to Astoria from here in those days, it took you a week to 10 days. To go by boat, it took you 12 hours. That's the reason the boats were successful. They were flat bottom.
Okay.
They had quite a bit of shear to them, but they were wide in relation to their length. They wouldn't last 20 minutes at sea. Well, some of them were 3-deckers. And the lower decks on all of those were used for freight. The upper decks were used for passengers. And then the pilot house was above those. So actually they stood pretty tall. They were all old boats.
They've been around for.
Yeah, they were all old boats. The basic Sternwheeler had 2 cylinders for engines. Had one on both sides of the ship. And they were, depending on the size of the ship, anywhere from 12, 14-inch cylinders up to 24-inch cylinders. And the cylinder was pushed back and forth with steam and a slide valve. In early history, they had a lot of steam engines blow up, lots of them. Lived on a boat and you worked for $1 a day, and a day was 24 hours, $1 a day in board and room. And you worked whenever you needed to work, no matter what the time of day was. One year on the Stranger, I went 2 weeks without taking my clothes off. Change your shoes and socks, because you had to, your feet would fall off. Really would. Yeah. Lots of times we worked 2 weeks straight without changing clothes. We were busy and times were tough. And you either worked or got off. And you got $1 a day for that work. One. $1 a day board and room. And they had more labor than they could handle.
Okay, tell me what you did when you started in 1928. What was your job?
I was a mess boy. Washed dishes and served meals and peeled potatoes. Then we had to cook quit one time, and I was cook for 3 weeks. My first job was on the Lurleen to Astoria, and that's where I done my first galley work, and then the next year I was on the Stranger to Salem, and that was galley work. And the orders come down the first day. They give me an old-timer that's been on the river all his life, and he done my best boy work, and we worked together on the thing. And the orders come down the first cotton picking day. Anybody that complained about the food got to be cooked. And we never had a complaint. The only kind of pie I learned to cook before the cook quit, I could make raisin pie. And we served raisin pie for 2 weeks. And never had a complaint. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. No, my dad bought the Undine, the Lurleen, and the Georgiana. And he took the engines out of the Lurleen and put them in the Undine because they were better engines. And then scrapped the Lurleen. Yeah.
Did he treat you like just an ordinary deckhand, or did he treat you like a son?
Neither one. He treated me like a slave. All the nasty jobs on a boat I got, but I learned the boat. Our bilges on those boats were only 2 feet deep, and were 150, 160 feet long, and you got to crawl down through those bilges to clean the scuppers and repair cables. And
whoa. Is that right?
So when I got through working on my dad, I knew what a boat was built like, and I knew how to fix it. But
you have to crawl down there on your belly?
Yep.
And pretty dark. What would you use for light?
Lantern, coal oil lantern.
Wow. So about how old were you in 1928?
15.
So you worked for your dad when you first started?
Yep.
And you worked for your dad how long?
2 years.
Then what happened?
I went to work for on another boat by myself. I didn't even tell him who I was, just went down and got a job.
And what kind of job and boat was that?
That was, it was on the old Umatilla, and we was hauling grain bags out of, well, they were made at the penitentiary in Salem. And we hauled these grain bags, well, they come down here on boat, and we hauled them on the Umatilla up to Wallulu and the Dalles and all up and down the river for the grain industry. Grain was all handled in sacks, 2-bushel sacks.
And what kind of boat was that?
Sternwheeler, 200 and, don't remember exactly, about 235 feet long. And the first night out, they had so many crew, and they're all green crew. They were short of bunks, so I got a blanket to lay alongside the engines. And the blankets were alive with bed bugs.
Oh, wow.
Alive, I mean, thousands of them. And I had to get up and shake the blankets out and took them up on the bow and got away from that heat in the engine room and slept on the bow. We eventually steam cleaned the bunk room and all that and got rid of all the bugs, but they were rough for the first 3 or 4 days. Regulations is what kills steam. Steam is still far cheaper to operate than diesel is. Well, you get more, I guess you could bring it down to BTUs, because that's what it all ends up to. You get more BTUs out of steam than you do out of diesel internal combustion engine. We could run to Astoria with those big boats on a barrel and a half of fuel. 42-gallon barrel, yeah. Try and do that with anything else. Don't amount to anything. And they use the lowest grade of fuel there is. I mean, if you didn't get it hot, it wouldn't even burn. We always blow a whistle for the landing when we got close to it.
Okay.
And if there was anybody there, we stopped, or if we had freight to pick up one way or the other. But no, there was no radios, there was no telephones. First telephones I had, we had communications at St. Helens, and there was a lighthouse at Kelly Point that had telephone communications. in Astoria. And that's about the only telephone communication we had. You'd get lots of your orders for pickup or delivery by mail. Well, there was no hurry in those days. I mean, if you got it this week, okay. If you don't, you get it next week.
How often would you make the run to Astoria?
Every day. We'd leave Portland at 7, 8 o'clock at night, get down there about 5 o'clock, unload and reload and come back up, leave down there about 8 o'clock and get in up here about 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening. Reload and turn around and go back.
Every single day?
Every day. Every day.
Weekends too?
Yep, Saturday and Sunday. They were your big passenger loads. We had to dock and unload freight and the passengers and reload and make it in less than 5 minutes.
Is that right?
The boat would still be bouncing the time you turned her loose to go down the river. I never saw the Columbia River going down in daylight or coming up at night until I got my own boat. We always went down at night and back up the river in the daylight.
But were there other boats serving the public during the day, left Portland earlier?
Well, I think the Georgiana left in the mornings. Now some of the boats, and I don't remember which ones anymore, would make daylight both ways. They'd lay down Astoria all night and come back the next day. No, my dad was the best frogman in the river. When you can run a round trip to Astoria and back every day in the fog, or when there is fog, and not miss a trip, you've accomplished something. And I don't care who you are. Even today with radars.
Well, that was a heck of a responsibility for your dad too.
Oh yeah.
You had a lot of passengers.
Got all those people at stake. And when you have a real bad trip, I mean when the fog was real nasty, sometimes he wouldn't eat for a week afterwards. Just tied up in knots, you know, on nerves, yeah. Now my dad was the best I ever knew. You wake him up out of a sound sleep, and just by the sound of the engines and the feel of the boat, he'd tell you where he's at. It's the only man I ever knew that could do it, but he never missed. Without anything, just feel of the boat. You feel it. You feel the boat. You can tell you're getting in shallow water. Now, when you're in deep water, you don't get that. You don't get that echo back, but you get it off of shallow water. And of course, the water it's a different all the way. The whole Columbia River is a different depth every 100 feet. You know, I mean, one time you got 20 feet, the next minute you got 30, or maybe only 10. But it's constant change.
So you're saying he knew where he was because of the depth of the water?
From the vibration of the boat, yeah.
That's incredible.
steam come back. But I don't think it ever will.